The mixture of elderly established artists and younger, but not the youngest, in the exhibition of 1912, points in the direction of the exhibition being an attempt to select artists who would not be found provocative among a broad public with a general interest in art. The exhibition in 1912, the main aim was to open up the American market for Scandinavian painting. It was not part of a sophisticated discussion about the development and future direction of art. Sohlberg was represented with 5 paintings in the Scandinavian exhibition. Not this painting. Is it this one? No. That way. Which one? The blue? There. Okay. 5 paintings: Autumn Landscape, Fisherman's Cottage, Mountain, Winter Landscape. This is the version of 1900, not the version that was actually in the exhibition in Toronto, yes? This one, 1901. This painting, Afternoon, and Wagon Road from 1905. In addition, the catalogue reproduced self-portrait of 1896. Haral Sohlberg, born in 1869 in Christiania, made his debut at the National Art Exhibition in the spring of 1894 with the painting Evening Glow in the National Gallery of Oslo. The painting received excellent reviews and was purchased by the National Gallery. In the following years, Sohlberg got scholarships and studied further in Paris and Weimar. He was included in international presentations of Norwegian art in the World Fair, Paris, 1900, the Venice Biennial, 1907, an exhibition of Scandinavian art in Helsinki, 1911, and the Kunstlabund Hagen exhibition in Vienna in 1912. On that occasion, the director of the National Gallery in Oslo, Jens Thies, reported home that the Norwegian artist Edvard Munch and Sohlberg attracted the most attention. While Munch stirred controversy, Sohlberg attracted unanimous admiration. When Sohlberg attended the exhibition of Scandinavian art under the auspice of the American Scandinavian Society from 1912 until 13, he was one of the few artists who not only got favorable reviews, but sold 2 of his work. Inspired by his sales in America and good reviews, Sohlberg considered in 1915 making a trip to the US to explore the possibility of settling. This is a painting from 1914. The idea of emigrating was stopped by the outbreak of the First World War. But he made thorough preparations for his presentation at the World Exposition in San Francisco, the Panama Pacific International Exposition, that was to take place in 1915. As part of the preparations, he translated panegyric criticism from the pen of Fritz Taulau, beside Anders Zorn, the most well-known Scandinavian artist in the USA at that time, and of Jens Thies. The translations were sent to J. Nilsen Laurvig, Norwegian descendant, and the commissioner of the art exhibition. If the exhibition in San Francisco brought him success, Sohlberg was still considering emigrating. Michael Williams wrote a brief guide to the Department of Fine Arts of the San Francisco exhibition. In the Norwegian section, Williams emphasized Henrik Lund and Edvard Munch, but his favorite was Sohlberg, who had a room of his own. William writes, quote, Sohlberg was granted a Medal of Honor. The large nocturnal landscape, this landscape, where a huge ice mountain looms beneath the mystical moonlight, is perhaps the most striking of Sohlberg's tremendously vital work. But it's all highly notable, end of quote. Despite of his success in San Francisco, and later the same year, in his participation in the Carnegie Exposition in Philadelphia, Sohlberg did not however, immigrate to the USA. His American career doesn't end in 1915. The art historian Johan Langgaard wrote an article about him in the American Scandinavian Review of 1937. The article was illustrated with a number of major works. Kirk Warnedo inaugurated an exhibition of early modern Scandinavian art, 1880, modern art, 1880-1910, at the request of Scandinavia Today Committee. The show Northern Light were toured through the Brooklyn Museum, the Corcoran Gallery in Washington, and the Minneapolis Institute of Arts in 1982. And Roald Nesgaard was the curator of Mystic North, 1984. in Toronto and Cincinnati, putting the group of 7 into a broad international context. Sohlberg figured prominently in that exhibition, and his painting Night from 1905 was on the cover of the catalogue. In 1992, it was taken an initiative to create an exhibition of Norwegian art with Sohlberg as a possible participant at the National Academy of Design Museum. The director at that time was Ed Gallagher, and we agreed to go for the 2 artists, Haral Sohlberg and Edvard Munch. And the exhibition, Landscapes of the Mind, was held in 1994. It was generally well received and was favorably reviewed in the New York Times by the dreaded Roberta Smith. In 2002, the painting Fisherman's Cottage was presented to the Art Institute in Chicago. That was one of the 2 paintings sold in 1912-13 exhibition. And in the summer of 2011, Sohlberg's painting Country Road from 1905 was included in the display of European painting in the Metropolitan Museum of Arts on loan from a private collector. And his painting Flower Meadow in the North is at the moment to be seen at the Scandinavian House. Why has Sohlberg had an appeal to some people, at least in the North American art community? Looking and reading through the catalogue of Scandinavian Exhibition, one is struck by the preference for the local Scandinavian landscape as subject. This points in the direction of an important common denominator between the Scandinavian artists and many of the young North American painters, a denominator of great consequence, especially for Canadian art, the search for a national iconography and the artistic means and methods for constructing and expressing this iconography. According to the creation myth of the Canadian group of 7, the 2 Canadian artists, Lauren Harris and James Edward MacDonald, had almost a revelation when they saw the exhibition of Scandinavian painting, visiting the exhibition in Buffalo in 1913. But through the publication of Jürgen Palm, The Studio, this rather graphical expression, which we find among artists like Munch, Sohlberg, Fiesta, this graphical expression, this strong emphasis on contrast and reduction of natural forms into ornament, had reached a wide audience throughout German and English-speaking world and become an international lingua from the late 1890s, reinforced by the growing interest for East Asian prints. The excessiveness of this idiom had an interesting consequence regarding to the development of artistic photography. I just mentioned this because when I look at pictorialist photographers like the Steichen, it's striking how much those pictures resembles the paintings we are looking at. And it's, of course, not a coincidence, because when Steichen went to Paris, his friend became, his close friend became Fritz Taulow. And if you look at photographs by Clarence White, Alvin Langdon Coburn, and so on, they were very much in the family, this kind of family of images and way of presenting nature. And this stylization of nature and motifs, this kind of motifs, seems to have found their way into paintings by Arthur Doe and Georgia O'Keeffe. The Scandinavians, Canadians, and the Americans artists, they all have a common references to more, at that time, famous European artists like Hodler and Segantini. And as we have seen from the presentation of Roland Nesgaard, it's a kind of iconographic typologies which is common to all these artists, and its function as a kind of artistic glue of common motifs transgressing stylistically boundaries and national boundaries. Just run through some of these what you could call typologies, like the sunset. You have Sohlberg, of course. This important Norwegian artist, Torolf Holmboe, he is actually the missing link between this generation and Friedrich. He studied in Berlin in 1889. He was a friend of Andreas Aubert, who wrote the famous book on Philipp Otto Runge and the book on Friedrich. A great friend of Edvard Munch, Sohlberg, all of them, but probably not a great artist, but important. Hodler, Vallotton, Munch, even David Hockney, and of course Sohlberg. Yeah. This sunset motifs. This and Lauren Harris. You can put them all together, and this is the kind of family resemblance that you pointed out. The mountain is also a common motif this period, transgressing boundaries of style and nations. Lauren Harris, the Canadian, and of course O'Keeffe. Landscapes with trees and snow, Munch. Again, Holmboe, Thorvald Eriksen, Holberg, Munch, Thompson. Holmboe. And then Marsden Hartley. The Scandinavians and North Americans elaborated these typologies in styles ranging from realism to symbolism, and presenting the subjects in abstracted decorative patterns. This represents a regionalist painting which in numbers, if not in importance for the future stylistic development of art, dominated among painters in Europe and America into the 1940s. It should therefore be of no surprise if North American art and Scandinavian, particularly Norwegian art, has close similarities into the 1940s. A Norwegian looking at American painting, especially landscape paintings from around 1910 into 1920s, will often be struck by a kind of resemblance between Scandinavian and American art painting. In some instances, it's possible to point to the sources of the resemblance, but in other cases, it's a kind of elusive relation. The early and late landscapes by the hand of Marsden Hartley are one such instance where we can get a hunch of a strange familiarity between Scandinavian, particularly Norwegian, landscape painting and American art. Townsend Ludington must have had such a feeling when he finds it appropriate to mention in his biography of Hartley that during Hartley's stay in Buffalo in February 1914, he may have seen a catalogue for the large exhibition, Contemporary Scandinavian Art, that had been held a year earlier at the Albright Art Gallery in Buffalo. The show profoundly affected the Canadian artists, MacDonald and Harris, whose landscape paintings subsequently took on the same sort of sweep and horizontal movement that could one day would become a trademark for Hartley's many paintings of New Mexico and province. Hartley's development after 1916 and later supports the assumption that the early and later part of his landscape paintings are connected to similar developments in the Northern European landscape painting. Hartley had his first one-man show at the home of Sarah Bull at Green Acre in Elliot, where Hartley was staying in August-September 1907. Bull was the widower of the Norwegian violin virtuoso Ole Bull. In his time, he's as famous as Madonna and Lady Gaga put together, and that equals Mike Jagger. Yeah, that's true. With her wealth, Sarah Bull was a major sponsor of the Utopian Green Acre Congress of Religion, established in 1894. She was a sponsor of Charles Sanders Peirce and a sponsor of Marsden Hartley. And she is probably the closest connection to Scandinavia, especially Norway, that Hartley was ever to have. Marsden Hartley was invited to work in a studio and live at her house in Cambridge outside Boston after his stay at Green Acre, and lived there from the fall of 1907 into the spring of 1908. And that's the period, actually, when he started to paint like this. The milieu Hartley befriended in Green Acre and later in Cambridge was to have a strong impact on his intellectual development, although he later characterized the spinsters of New England as the gargoyles supporting old buttresses, these virgins that roam wistfully among the ruins, victims of an effete worship. He was already familiar with the works of Henry David Thoreau, Rolfe, Waldo Emerson, Whitman, and his sojourn at Green Acre confirmed and strengthened his interest in the transcendentalist tradition, besides introducing him to Eastern philosophy, culture, and art. Hartley's lifelong interest in magic and mysticism must have got quite a spur, surrounded as he was by a community of obscurantists. During his stay at Green Acre and Cambridge, Boston, Hartley painted his first personal works. Later he referred to finding a reproduction of a painting by Segantini in a copy of Jugend as the experience that freed his talent. It was Segantini's manner of stitching patches of color together in a dense pattern of distinct brush strokes that fascinated Hartley. In a broader context, this manner of working was part of a general development inside post-impressionism, trying to fuse the more rigorous system and technique of Seurat and Signac with impulses from the stylistic developments of French Art Nouveau and German Jugend and Scandinavian art. In the Scandinavian exhibition, this fusion could be seen prominently in the paintings of Gustav Fiesta. What singles out Hartley's efforts in this direction is the energetic handling of the paint, the quirky brush strokes and the immersive space of his landscapes. This treatment of space, these immersive spaces, as if he's throwing himself at the landscape, trying to obliterate the distance between the painter and the motif, is an effort to obtain a mystic oneness with nature. And this Hartley has in common with Sohlberg in Sohlberg's Winter Night in the Mountain. What Sohlberg and Hartley also had in common was a belief in the empirical nature as a sign pointing in the direction of the spiritual and the aspiration to reach a community with nature. Defining what it means to be a transcendentalist, which he equals to idealist. The philosopher Emerson writes, quote, "The materialist insists on facts, on history, on the force of circumstances, and the animal wants of man. The idealist on the power of thought and will, on inspiration, on miracle, on individual culture." End of quote. In a letter to Byron Smith from 1915, that was the owner of the fisherman's cottage, Sohlberg recollects what a revelation his first meeting with this motif had been, this painting. "I was almost overcome by a rush of emotional greater than I had ever experienced before. The longer I stood Gazing at the scene, the more I seemed to feel what a solitary and pitiful atom I was in an endless universe. I grew uneasy. I could hear my heart beginning to beat loudly. It was as if I had suddenly awakened in a new, unimagined, and inexplicable world. End of quote. Stressing the power of thought and will, emotion, inspiration, spirit, miracle, revelation, individualism, directness of impulse, the unimagined and inexplicable, sounds like an inventory of concepts flourishing among artists representing as different directions among modern artists as Fauvism and German Expressionism, and even, of course, Kandinsky. Pointing to a shared inheritance from 19th century Romanticism, culminating in late Symbolism. The late art historian Robert Rosenblum made this the theme of his famous book on the Romantic landscape tradition, oddly enough without mentioning neither Sohlberg nor Hartley. We are a bit behind schedule, isn't it? What?
A little, yes.
Yeah. The regionalism in North American painting through the interwar years can to a certain degree be understood as a plea for the values represented by beliefs, culture, forms of life and production still active and of actuality among large segments of the population. They felt these values threatened by industrialization and urbanization. What the art historian Svein Olav Hoff writes in his thesis on Henrik Sørensen is represented in the exhibition, on the artist's relation to the issue of nationalism has relevance to an understanding of the many artists included in the Scandinavian exhibition that had withdrawn from the city into faraway abodes. As Hoff emphasized in his book, the antagonism between center and periphery was, and it is still, one of the most manifest and decisive in Norwegian culture and political debate. Painting characteristic Norwegian landscapes and subjects could be looked upon as a polemic against the center and their values. The younger generation Norwegian artists carried on a tradition from artists like the naturalist Erik Wernskjold, also included in the exhibition, describing the Norwegian farmers and not the bourgeois and civil servants of the urban centers as the backbone of the independent Norway. The regionalism in American painting through the interwar years can probably, to a certain degree at least, be understood in this perspective as a plea for the values represented by beliefs, culture, forms of life and production, and not understood as the artistic manifestation of a backward periphery out of sync with dominating artistic trends in the urban center. Thank you.